right, it's another edition of the All Ball Show. Mike Yam and Lamar Hurd with you. All right, we've had guests the last couple of weeks, Lamar. You and I were like, look, we got some stuff that we need to get off our chest here, especially when it comes to the NCAA tournament. We'll hit that hard, but how are you feeling, man? Because now I feel like brackets are busting. We got bubbles bursting, the whole thing.
Busted. Pretty much. That's how I'm feeling. As usual. I usually don't even do brackets, but Bethany wanted to do one this year, so we did one kind of in competition. But yeah, I've given up on brackets for the most part. It doesn't work out. How are you doing?
Look, I didn't even do a bracket this year. I'm probably like the only person in the country who did not do a bracket. And that's actually helped me. I've actually enjoyed just watching the games. It totally feels different. It's probably the first time in my entire life I haven't done a bracket, although, you know what I mean? Like at the point in your life when you can do brackets, I don't even remember, but this has been sort of awesome. I was watching the other night, the U of A game against Oregon, that thing coming down to the wire, and it feels like March, right? Like when you get these finishes that are so epic down the stretch where you feel like with a minute and a half to go, oh, like this team's going to hold on. And then there's a run, there's a play. It's college basketball. And I almost forget this because, Lamar, I remember working with Richard Jefferson for the first time in studio over at Pac-12 Network. And you know this because you've been in the throes of it on the NBA side. It is like a completely different sport. We could call it basketball, but it's different. And what I mean by that is like there's sometimes like late game execution. Kevin O'Neal, who, by the way, I just caught up with KO the other day. KO used to say this all the time with college players. This whole 2-for-1 thing, he's like, these dudes can't handle that. This ain't the NBA. And I would chuckle and laugh and say, you know what? Like he might not be totally wrong by this. But I remember like situational stuff where I'm sitting next to RJ. And I'm telling him, I'm like, hey, this game is not over. You might think it's over. It's going to come down to free throws down the stretch. I guarantee these kids aren't going to hit their free throws, and it's going to be a game, and this other team might actually win. And I think it played out that way. And if it didn't, it was still an argument down the stretch. But it gets me thinking here, Lamar, what's it like? And I know we've maybe touched on this a little bit, but it's a big game at the end of the season because we've done this basically every network I've ever worked at, NBA TV, ESPN, Pac-12 Network, NFL, we do this now. Winning locker room. There's nothing better than the scene of a winning locker room. Celebrate. You got an upset? Are you kidding me? You got water everywhere, the champagne, the bubbles, the whole thing, depending on the sport. That means there's a losing locker room, though. And we don't always highlight the defeat and what it's like to suffer some of these losses. So congratulations to all the teams that are still dancing. But Lamar, when you are a college athlete, I feel like it's probably going to hit a little different when maybe this is not even just your last college game. You making arguments for some of these teams, they might not get back to the tournament.
You're right. Yes. Man, it's a big deal because it hurts when it's the last game because there's a finality that coaches, people talk about up until that point. Like you'll have practices in the middle of November, December, where maybe the team isn't going hard and the coach will say, all right, the time is going to fly. You're going to look back one day and say, I wish I'd gone harder there. I wish it. And a lot of times student athletes, they don't register that when that is said to them. But then that moment hits. And as soon as it hits, it like just all makes sense. And it's one of those moments where you can't go back and change anything. You realize like either all the work you put in was at your max level or close to it, or you cheated yourself a little bit. And then you got to deal with those feelings and whatever that means to you. Like some athletes take that moment and then it changes their lives because that was the one check they needed. Then there's other athletes who maybe don't take accountability fully and they're busy. I got Team ATM that I played with back in 02 to 06 in college that still to this day blame our coach for how their careers went out. Now, mind you, our coach, I got a good relationship with my coach at that time. We were just in the Bay Area to take on the Warriors a couple weeks ago. He reaches out every time I go down there to try to meet up and talk. So like we're good. With that, I can understand some of the anger and disdain some of my teammates have for the way that situation went. They'll be one of the first to tell you, hey, that coach had he had the first winning season in Oregon State in 15 years. When I was there, Gary Payton, the glove, his team was the last team that won, that had a winning record. We were the next team 15 years later. Normally, a coach in that situation, you get a nice extension. You're going to be there for a while. You might become a household name at that school. We made it to the NIT. We made it to postseason play for the first time since that period. Yam, he got fired a year after I graduated. He's never coached D1 ball again, never coached at any level again as a head coach. So that would support some of the argument that some of those teammates might have about that coach, where it's like, hey, this guy, I don't know, man. I don't know.
Yeah.
And coaches as well, they feel sometimes like, well, if I had a different group of players, I would have been in a better situation. So you can do the back and forth all day long. But what I'm saying is that was a moment, I know for me, like I've talked to you a lot about my college career and the lessons I've taken from that. Like I have so many things that if I could have done different, it would have been a whole different ball game. And it didn't take me long to learn that. Like I realized that when I had my last game. Like I had my last game, it was the game against Oregon at home. It was I had been hurt throughout half of my senior season, and Ernie Kent, who was the coach of the Ducks at the time, and my head coach, they made an agreement that they would let me start the game for tip off, and then once somebody possessed the ball, the refs were going to shut the game down and let me sub out. I had no idea. So like I warmed up for that game thinking, oh, I'm about to play again. I'm gonna get like 5-10 minutes. I don't know how much I can do, with the injury I had. And so they tip the ball and like I'm ready. And then the whistle blows and I'm looking around and the crowd starts standing up to clap. Like it's almost like everybody knew except me. And then I remember walking off to the side and like I was in tears because more so of anger,
Mm.
I guess would be the emotion that I had of like, man, I came here and I wasted my time here. I should have been an entirely different player throughout my period here, and it's actually over now. And part of the anger that year came because my senior season was the first season where since I started having really some of those mental struggles I started to have late in my freshman year and really heavy in my sophomore year and the worst in my junior year, my senior season was the first year I went in and I was like, all right, yep, I got some teammates who they're gonna choose to do themselves over the team. Okay, I got some people that don't believe that. Okay, I'm gonna do me then. I'm gonna get mine because in situations of dysfunction, if you don't get yours, like you're gonna be the one left out. Like, yeah, you know me as a teammate of your like you and I, we can do a show all day long, and it never has to be called the Lamar and Mike Yam. It could be the
Sure.
Mike Yam show. Lamar's a guest, or I don't care as
Yeah,
long
we
as
don't
we're winning.
totally.
If we're winning and we're together, I don't care about all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
But when that stuff's not in place, then okay, now I got to get mine. So that senior season for me, Yam, was the first time in my life. Because even in high school, I averaged a triple double in high school, and I averaged 10 assists. That was one of the categories. And part of it was I remember my senior year in high school, my coach and I we started talking about, okay, do I need to score more just to like raise my scoring total? And then college coaches would come and watch and say, no, we see he can score when he needs to score. So as soon as I heard that, I'm like, oh, I'm good. I don't need to average. So I averaged like 12 points, 10 rebounds, 10 assists. And I was good. And we were winning. We were a top 25 team in the country. But that senior year for me, when I realized like, no, it's a little different around here. You got to do things differently. When that finality hit, I was upset that I allowed myself to not be on the upper end of all that.
Yeah.
And it changed my life in a lot of ways because I've responded accordingly in all other areas.
Do you think what you're describing in the state of college basketball now, I know still exists,
Mhm.
but I gotta be honest, I don't know if it exists in this current the form that you're describing, where it's your last game of your senior season. Like, not for nothing, dudes are out way
Yes.
faster than that. You're talking
Yes.
like, hey, sophomore year, like, are you kidding me? Like, dude,
Yeah.
if I'm not getting run my freshman year, Lord knows I'm out the door probably. I mean, that's just kind of how it goes in a 4-year guy. I mean, how we got the NFL draft around the corner. We just had David Carr on our last episode. By the way, if you didn't check that out, you can listen to it on the podcast. But we get DC on, and, we asked him about his experience, and it's so different. I go to these showcases, these college, football showcases. I'm like, damn, man, some of these dudes got 3 or 4 schools. Like,
Yeah.
how are you supposed to keep
Those
up?
days are
You
done.
They're
Those days
done. They're done.
are done.
Would you
They're
would
done.
you have stayed? Or excuse me, would you have bounced if you had that opportunity the way it is presented now to college
I don't know
athletes?
because I don't know. I had an opportunity to leave after my freshman year at Oregon State, which was my better year out of all my years. I had an opportunity to transfer to Baylor University the following
Yeah,
season
yeah.
because my high school coach, who's also like my father figure, he became an assistant coach on that Baylor team. So with Scott Drew, I would have been on that team. From a basketball standpoint, it probably would have been the best thing I could have done.
Totally.
Because those are people who knew my game inside out. They would have empowered me to be who I really am as a basketball player. And at that time, mentally, I needed that type of support. So I had an opportunity to, but I don't know that I would have, because I like the idea of going somewhere, being somewhere, and building there until you give me a reason to leave. Like, if you as a program, you don't give me a reason to leave, then I don't want to have to leave or try to leave. Also, though, Yam, opportunities are different nowadays too. Like, there's kids that are getting different NIL opportunities or just different opportunities to further their career in a way that wasn't presented in the past. So I don't even fault the kids with all of this the same way. I've said this in a previous episode we had, and I'll say it again. A lot of these things happen, and then people want to blame the kids. Adults are the reason they got to this place. Kids are not the reason it gets to this place. So I'm not going to go into the whole blame the kid thing. Adults had a chance to figure this out. Adults had a chance to set a precedent and a standard for the way that college athletics would function. And they did not do it in a way that we were able to now avoid what we see now in the college landscape.
Like, I could make an argument. I love the fact that a student athlete can go out there and get his and go and get paid and use their name, image, or like, and what's that?
And hers.
Yeah, no question. I know you mean, no question to go out there and do that. The thing that's disappointing is, I would argue that a lot of the issues that we're having right now in college athletics have nothing to do with NIL. It's money and collectives that are going to student athletes, masked and disguised as NIL. And that's the problem. If you would have legislated this thing and been okay with 18-year-olds making money, like any other 18-year-old who doesn't play a sport can go and do on a college campus, we wouldn't be in this situation. But here we go. And I'm looking at the transfer portal, and there's some schools, every single day that have one of their higher ranked transfers going, yo, I'm out. And it's a potential $1 million deal somewhere else. And by the way, not everyone's getting $1 million deal, but for some student athletes, 100K, 50K, 200K, that's meaningful depending on your background and what you think you can be as a professional athlete or not as a pro.
Yes.
And they're trying to monetize. And that's why I don't have a huge problem with it. We will run it back next week. I got another story that I want to bring up that's sports adjacent, but also in kind of that recruiting and how you communicate. We'll do that. I should have brought it up today. We don't have time for it. We'll do it next week. And by the way, if your team is still dancing, your bracket's in place, I hope you win. We'll talk to you next week here on All Ball.